Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading the book Twice Freed by Patricia Sanjan with permission of Christian Focus Publications, and we are reading chapter 16. His first thrill of elation was followed by a wave of fear. He had never realized till now how much that he had taken for granted had been thrown in with his slavery. A roof over his head, a bed, food, clothing, regular work, and he had to admit, a kind, just master. Now he had forfeited his right to all these things forever. From now onward he must fight for them and earn them or go without. He was glad he was not alone on the highway. He was just one of the stream of nameless refugees, some of whom purposed to push on to Ephesus or Miletus, while others would seek shelter in towns and villages along the highway. Some had snatched up few possessions, some came empty-handed. No one spoke to anyone else. All had their own griefs and problems, and shocked and stunned, their one idea was to move on. They knew not where. The sultry day was fading early, and the storm clouds hung low, blotting out the mountains. Very soon darkness drew a veil over the stricken city, and Onesimus knew that it would be a moonless, starless night, and he was glad of that too. He must push on as fast as he could, for he did not entirely trust Glaucus. It was just possible that the bailiff, out of spite, would decide to behave like a genuine Christian and confess his sins and those of Onesimus as well. In that case, they would soon be after him on swift horses with hunting dogs, and he would not stand a chance. Tired as he was, he resolved to walk all night and sleep hidden away in the hills by day. It was an inky night. Only the black shapes of the trees on either side kept his feet on the highway. But he walked on, hungry, weary, and cold, until about 4 hours after midnight. All the other travelers had fallen behind, and his head was reeling and his feet were blistered when he realized that something was happening. A cock crowed, some birds tweetered, and the cattle in the fields stirred in their sleep. A small wind, sweet with the scent of hay, was rustling in the poplars. And now he could see the shapes of the mountains, black against a clear sky. He scrambled up the bank into the spiry larches and found a hollow sheltered by some tarmus bushes. He turned and looked towards Colossae and Laodicea and saw that the day was breaking behind his own mountains and canyons. She would be asleep now in the wattled hut, worn out by her grief, and on the other side of the valley, Archippus was probably lying awake, his leg aching as usual, mourning for his slave and friend. "I'm sorry, Archippus," he whispered, and creeping under the tarmus bushes, fell asleep with a strangely heavy heart. He slept all through the warm summer day and awoke an hour or two before sunset with a raging hunger. It was good to know that he could buy bread. He fingered the packet of gold tucked into his wallet and a small bag of coins sewn into his girdle. Something had prompted him to bring it with him when he set out for Laodicea. The highways abounded with robbers. He must sew the gold into his clothing as soon as possible, although his tunic was so plastered with earth and dust that most people would mistake him for a beggar. He traveled 25 miles that night, and on the 4th day trudged over the shoulder of Mount Corosus and saw the town of Ephesus below. Lovely in the evening light, memories came flooding back. The horror of the temple, that nightmare evening when Archippus fell, those strange earthly nights when they huddled in Aquila's house. He wondered where the strange fellow Paul was now, probably murdered long ago. He would have loved to linger, but he dared not. His master had many friends in Ephesus, and he might easily be recognized. He struck straight down to the canal and followed it to the harbor. If his luck held, he might get a ship, but he would not argue about where it was going as long as he could put the sea between him and the country of Phrygia. But his longing was to reach the land of his father. Several ships rode at anchor, and he stood looking westward. Over the edge of the harbor, somewhere beyond the sunset, lay Athens and Parnassus, where the gods dwelt. If he could get to that shrine of beauty and worship there, would he perhaps find what he was seeking? Some balm for the sorrows of life? Some escape from its sordidness? Some philosophy that would lure him rather than challenge him? cause him to forget rather than to stab him to remembrance? Perhaps beauty was the answer. Then he would seek for beauty. One Mediterranean galley, larger than the rest, had just been loaded, and the sailors were walking away. But a boy about Onesimus's age lingered, walking the length of the craft back again, as though examining it carefully. He was meticulously dressed in a spotless tunic and the long, wide-sleeved overcoat of an educated Greek with a rich ornated stripe of material sewn down each side. His features were pure Greek and his figure that of a young Spartan athlete. He seemed to Onesimus to embody that land of his fathers, and he watched him, fascinated for a time. Then, accurately conscious of his own condition, Onesimus dared to ask him whether he knew whereto the ship was bound and when would it sail. The boy looked at him distastefully. "It's bound for Corinth, and it stops in Athens," he replied in perfect Greek. "And if the wind is favorable, it should sail at dawn tomorrow." He was turning away when Onesimus tried again. "I want to travel on her," he said boldly. "To whom shall I apply?" The boy raised his eyebrows. "It costs money, you know," he said. Onesimus flushed angrily, and his pride overcame his prudence. "I can pay for my fare," he replied hotly. "Well, then, perhaps you better first pay the price of a new tunic," said the boy. "This is a first-class ship, and if you do not mind my saying so, you hardly look a first-class passenger." Onesimus's anger was getting the better of him. "I suppose you have hardly heard of the disaster in Laodicea," he retorted sarcastically. "Hundreds are dead in the earthquake, and we who fled did not think it was worthwhile to go back and search the ruins for our banquet clothes. We were thankful to escape with our lives, and extra thankful to escape with something in our wallets." The contempt had passed from the boy's face, and he looked at Onesimus with interest. "The captain is already on board," he said in a different tone of voice. "Come before dawn and speak with him." Onesimus turned on his heels and followed the harbor well round to the beaches and plunged into the warm sea. It was nearly dark, and he washed away all the dust and dirt of the past 4 days, and then tried to do the same for his clothes. He dressed again in the soaking garments, and afraid of soiling them by lying down, he wandered about on the beach till after midnight, when the summer wind had dried him. He slept for a few hours on a slab of marble, and just before dawn he was back on the quarry. The sea was still dark, and the sunrise flamed over Mount Corosus. The quarry in front of the gallery was a hive of activity, for the wind was favorable. Sailors ran to and fro, ropes creaked, men shouted, and a little apart stood the captain with the young Greek beside him, a well-filled wallet over his shoulder. "This is the lad whom I spoke with," said the Greek. "He lost all, and nearly all, in the Laodicean earthquake, so make a merciful bargain for him. He wants to go to Athens." "How does he know I want to go to Athens?" thought Onesimus, drawing out a little packet from his belt as the captain named a price. He was relieved that there was no more, and he counted out the coins gratefully. There was still plenty. "You can go aboard now," said the captain, and Onesimus passed up the gangway onto the galley. He had never before set foot on a ship, and it thrilled him. This was a merchant ship taking the products of Asia to Greece. Sandals and woven cloaks and carpets from Laodicea, Phrygian embroidery, cheese, figs from the central plains behind Ephesus, goatskins and wool from the Sicilian grasslands. A rich medley of odors, heightened by the tang of the sea, rose from the hold. All at once bells started ringing. The sailors ran to hoist the great central sail, and the ship heeled away from the wind, and they were off. Onesimus staggered to the side of the ship and saw the bright sea ahead. Phrygia and his slavery lay behind him at last. But not only Phrygia and his slavery. He stood saying an irrevocable goodbye to Philemon, to Apphia, to Archippus and little Pescasia, the dogs, his mother's grave, the canyon, the flowered meadows and the flocks of sheep. So much that he had hated, and so much too that he had loved. But he did not say goodbye to little Miss Irina, for he pledged himself to see her again. His musings were suddenly interrupted by the Greek boy who had come to stand beside him. "My name is Aphias," said the youth. "I see we are traveling to Athens together. Have you ever been before?" Never, replied Onesimus. Are you a Greek? On my father's side. Then you are returning to the land of your fathers and to the home of your spirit. If you love beauty and spirit, and I see from your face that you love beauty, but you must come with me. Nothing could give me greater joy than to initiate a young devotee of beauty. I will stand beside you as we sight the cape and see the great white temple of Poseidon, and then we will watch together the flash of Athena's spear above the Acropolis. We will climb the steps of the Parthenon. How does one earn one's living in Athens? Onesimus was half irritated, half fascinated by his companion. Aphius looked pained, as though Onesimus had said something vulgar, and his reply was unsatisfactory. Apparently you did not earn your living in Athens. You were sustained by beauty, and the spirit dominated the body. You talked and worshipped and meditated. Sometimes you wandered on to the fragrant slopes of Hymettus and lay on beds of thyme and tasted the honey that was like nectar to the gods. Onesimus, fast yielding to the fascination, remembered that he still had plenty of gold in his wallet and gave himself up to the spell of the moment and the light roll of the ship, the swelling white sail against the azure sky and the smooth peacock blue of the Aegean Sea, the warm salt breeze and the pure clear-cut voice of the boy. He was talking of the history of his country now. One evening in the cool, they would walk out together to the plains of Thermopylae. One day they would rise at dawn and climb on the slopes of Parnassus. The magical voice crooned on, telling enchanted tales of the enchanted land, and Onesimus stretched out on the sun and slept peacefully. The enchantment did not break when on a pale golden evening 3 days later the western light gleamed on Athena's spear, and the pillars of the Parthenon against the rosy sky seemed to them tinged with pink, as though newly alit from the heaven. Aphius stood in the prow of the ship, his beautiful head lifted in silent adoration, tears in his eyes, and Onesimus shared his mood. They watched till the light faded, and as the stars shone out over the city, the ship cast anchor onto the bay of Pelion. They went ashore early next morning and set out to walk 5 miles inland towards the wall, and by the time they reached the city the heat was blaring. Young Athens was the most part, laughed and studied and discussed history and philosophy in the shade of the vines and the marble pillars. Onesimus was grateful to find himself completely undertaken for by Aphius, who treated him with princely generosity. He produced a clean tunic for him from somewhere and introduced him to the group of his friends. They all feasted together on bread and goat's cheese and the melons and slept in the shade. In the late afternoon they joined a crowd of disputers in the lovely theater at the foot of the Acropolis, but Aphius insisted they should not climb the hill until evening. When the world was still and the light is mellow, he explained, and the pillars are like warm gold, that is our moment. Not in the glare of noonday, but in the mystery of twilight, we will worship our goddess. O Onesimus, have you ever yearned for beauty and peace and truth? Tonight you will be satisfied. It was a time of a clear golden light when they finally climbed the steps of the Acropolis and passed through the Propylaea. Through the great marble pillars the sea shone like a sheet of silver, but inside the great temple of Atheus it was already shadowy, and Onesimus, keyed up to the highest expectation, was not disappointed. For here was beauty incarnate, some quality of perfect simplicity such as dwelt in the soul of little Urania. Here was no taint of occult evil as in the temple of Ephesus, but here he was standing on the very fringes of immortality. As they knelt worshipping before the mighty statue of Athena, he felt strangely close to the boy to his side. To come together to the source of beauty and wisdom and to share these emotions was surely the firmest basis for friendship. And from now onward they would be brothers. Life would never be quite the same again. They stayed for a long time beside the statue, and the golden light flamed to sunset, lighting up the gold and the crimsons of the temple. They wandered all round it, and looking for the shadowed hills and over to the darkened sea. Onesimus' soul, awed by the solemn chanting of the priests and the virgins, was drunk with such beauty, but his heart cried out, what next? Could he carry it with him when he returned to the world below, where men ate and slept and spat and cursed and hated and lied, where slaves groaned and earthquakes destroyed and the innocent suffered? Was there any meeting point? Had any god come down in compassion to man? Had Athena ever stooped to heal, transform with her beauty and her wisdom? He did not know. He must discuss it with Aphius. "Come, let us drink to the goddess," Aphius told him outside, and they sat down on the hillock below the temple. Although Aphius had implied that, having seen the temple, they would be in no further need of earthly food, Onesimus was relieved to see that he had brought a full basket of provisions. The warm night was heavy with the scent of thyme and mint, and Aphius, his beautiful features clear-cut against the moonlight, filled 2 cups with wine from a bottle. "We will drink and watch the temple wash silver by the huntress Diana," he jested, handing Onesimus a cup. "To the goddesses." The slave was tired and thirsty, and he drank it off in 1 draught. It was very sweet and strangely strong. "Aphius," he began, turning to his friend, but Aphius sat looking out to the sea, his wine untouched in his hand. "Aphius, something was happening." The boy at his side seemed to be receding, and the marble columns away to his right were reeling. He closed his eyes and laid his head on the pillar of wild thyme. It seemed to be sinking down into its fragrance. Had the goddess stooped and taken him into her arms? He did not know, but he gave himself up to a deep sleep. Aphius emptied his glass on the ground. He glanced at the sleeping boy contemptuously. "Poor fool," he murmured. "It's all been too easy." He had a good meal from the basket, then prodded Onesimus with his foot. He did not stir, so there was nothing to wait for. Leaning over, Aphius loosened his companion's girdle, slit the bag of coins and the packet of gold with his knife, hid them under the contents of the basket, and bounded off down the hill. I love you. I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.